Dennis was not faithful to me for a long time. Those are not our words. They are Meg Ryan's, said on the record, about the marriage she spent the next 25 years being blamed for destroying. Not him, her. Because for all that time, you were handed a much simpler story. America's sweetheart had cheated on her husband with a movie star and detonated her own marriage, homewrecker. The blame landed on her and on no one else. Here is the part almost nobody repeats next to it. By her account, she was the one who had been betrayed first for years, and she only learned the worst of it after the divorce was final. And this spring, a quarter century after it ended, something quietly put Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid back in the same room. Stay with us, because before you understand that room, you need to hear the rest of what she said. Picture the covers, because you saw them, not one magazine. A run of them all through the summer of 2000. Meg Ryan's face next to words like scandal and betrayal. The same face that had spent a decade selling you comfort. That contrast is the whole story in one image. Because before any of this, Meg Ryan was not a scandal. She was the reason an entire generation believed in the meet cute. In 1987, she's on the set of a science fiction comedy called Inner Space, working alongside Dennis Quaid. Nothing happens yet. 4 years later, on Valentine's Day, 1991, they marry. By then, you already loved her. When Harry Met Sally came out in 1989, Sleepless in Seattle in 1993, French Kiss in 1995, You've Got Mail in 1998. If you sat in a theater in the 90s, there's a good chance Meg Ryan is the reason you cried, or laughed, or believed two people could find each other again. Their son, Jack, was born in April of 1992. From the outside, it read like the fairy tale her own movies sold, the kind where the right two people find each other and the credits roll before anything can go wrong. From the inside, by her own later account, it was already something else. Here's part of what made it fragile from the start, and it comes from Dennis Quaid himself, not from a tabloid. Before he ever married Meg Ryan, he was fighting a cocaine addiction he later described in ugly detail. His words, "By the time I was doing the Big Easy, in the late 1980s, I was a mess." He said he was using roughly 2 grams a day at his worst. He got clean around 1990, went through treatment, got sober, and only then did the wedding happen, Valentine's Day, 1991. That kind of addiction doesn't just disappear because someone says the word sober. It takes years of work. And by his own account, Dennis Quaid did that work. So understand what that marriage actually started as. A newly sober man had just married the most beloved actress in the country, and together they were building a life on a foundation that had barely finished setting. None of that excuses what came later, but it matters for understanding why, when Meg Ryan looked back on this marriage years afterward, she reached for one plain word to describe it: unhealthy. Hold on to that word, unhealthy, because you'll need it again soon. Move forward 9 years from that wedding day to the moment everything cracked open in the tabloids, because the story you were told about that crack isn't the story Meg Ryan says actually happened. In 1999, Meg Ryan started filming Proof of Life alongside Russell Crowe, fresh off the film that was about to make him one of the biggest stars in the world, Gladiator. By the summer of 2000, photographers had pictures of the two of them together, and within weeks, the story was everywhere. Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid announced they were separating that June. The affair became public that July. The press didn't treat this as two adults whose marriage had ended. They treated it as a morality tale with a villain already cast. America's sweetheart, the woman from You've Got Mail, had blown up her own marriage for a man she met on a film set. That was the headline. That was the verdict. Her divorce from Dennis Quaid was finalized in 2001, and the label stuck to her name for the next 25 years. Here's why the story stuck to her so much harder than it would have stuck to almost anyone else. Meg Ryan's entire career was built on being trustworthy. Audiences didn't just enjoy her movies, they believed in her, the way you believe in a friend who's never let you down. That trust was the product. So when the affair became public, it landed harder than an ordinary celebrity scandal ever could. This was the face of loyalty herself, apparently proving she never meant any of it. Editors understood exactly what they were selling. Remember, this was the year 2000. There was no social media where she could post her own side and reach the same people the magazines reached. If a tabloid decided what the story was, that decision mostly stood, because print covers and television gossip shows were still most of what people saw. A story that ran on every grocery checkout in the country in a single summer didn't have to be true to become the only version anyone remembered. And Meg Ryan's own image, the thing that made her famous, became the exact thing the press turned into a weapon against her. Think about what that actually meant for her, day to day. Imagine buying milk and bread and seeing your own face staring back at you from the checkout stand, captioned with a word you know for a fact is not the whole truth, and not being able to say so, not yet, not for years, because saying it meant reopening a story she was trying to close for a young boy. Whatever was true about Russell Crowe, she wasn't the only one who'd broken a vow in that marriage. She carried that alone, raised her son inside it, and said nothing publicly for years. Then, in 2008, 8 years after that marriage ended, a reporter from InStyle magazine asked her about that marriage, and Meg Ryan finally said it plainly. This wasn't a tabloid catching her off guard outside a restaurant. It was a considered, on-the-record magazine interview, the kind where every quote gets checked before it runs. Now hear the line we opened with in full exactly as she said it. Dennis was not faithful to me for a long time, and that was sad, very painful. I found out more about that after I was divorced. Read that again, because it reverses the entire story you were told in 2000. By her account, the infidelity didn't start with her and Russell Crowe. It had already been happening to her inside her own marriage for years, and she only learned the full extent of it after the divorce was final. She went further in that same interview. She called it a sad, very unhealthy marriage. She said she probably should have left it much earlier. And she said the sentence the tabloids never printed. Russell didn't break up the marriage. The woman the world convicted of destroying a family was telling anyone who'd listened that the family had already been broken by someone else long before Russell Crowe's name ever entered it. Dennis Quaid didn't stay quiet about that either. His response on the record, his exact words, "It was 8 years ago, and I find it unbelievable that Meg continues publicly to rehash and rewrite the story of our relationship. He's never confirmed her version of events, and there's no court finding, no independent proof that settles which one of them is remembering it right. What exists is this: one sworn public statement from each of them, pointing in opposite directions, and a marriage that neither one has ever fully explained to anyone outside it. You get to be the judge here, not us. If you have ever been the one everyone blamed in a divorce, even though you privately knew the real story was more complicated than anyone printed, you already understand exactly what those 25 years must have felt like." Here's the part that should stop you. Meg Ryan said all of that once to one magazine in 2008. And then, for the next 18 years, she said almost nothing more about it in public. No campaign, no follow-up interviews demanding people believe her, no war with Dennis Quaid played out on talk shows. She had a young son when the marriage ended, and by 2008, he was 16, watching his mother's name get dragged through exactly the kind of headline she never wanted him reading. Every year she stayed quiet after that was a year she chose her son's normal childhood over her own reputation. That's 18 years of carrying the truth in silence in an industry that would have paid her handsomely to keep fighting about it in public. But silence isn't the same thing as forgetting. And it's worth asking what that silence actually cost her, because the answer isn't just a feeling. It shows up in an entire career. Dennis Quaid's own drug history, the 2 grams a day, the years he called being a mess, never became the reason casting directors stopped calling him. He kept working through the 90s and past them, and the story the industry told about him was recovery. A man who got clean and got his career back. Meg Ryan's story went somewhere else entirely. After 2000, the same magazines that had sold her for a decade as America's sweetheart spent the next several years selling her as the woman who threw that title away for a co-star. The romantic comedy leads that had been built specifically around her face slowed to almost nothing. She stepped back from the kind of starring roles that used to arrive by default for most of the next decade. None of that reached Russell Crowe. His career didn't slow down at all. Gladiator went on to win Best Picture at the Academy Awards that same season, with Crowe named Best Actor, while the affair was still fresh in every tabloid. Nobody booed him walking up to that podium. Nobody in that room asked him to account for the marriage that had just ended a few months earlier. Russell Crowe, for his part, has said almost nothing on the record about how or when his relationship with Meg Ryan actually began. He has never had to. The story was never framed as being about him. The affair had 2 participants. The public verdict only had one name on it, and it was never his. Now hold on to something else, because it matters for where this story ends up. That little boy from the divorce grew into an adult who barely seemed touched by any of it in public. Jack Quaid has said he didn't even fully understand how famous his parents were until he saw a People magazine cover with their faces on it. Picture that moment for him. A kid flipping through a magazine at an age when most children are only worried about homework, realizing for the first time that the two people who tucked him in at night were also two of the most talked about people in the country, the same kind of magazine that had once printed his mother's name next to the word scandal. His parents, whatever was happening between them, kept him out of that machine as much as two famous people possibly could. Jack Quaid grew up, became an actor himself, and by his 30s, had built something neither parent ever quite had at the same time: a hit streaming show. He plays Huey on The Boys, a series on Amazon's Prime Video where the so-called superheroes are actually corrupt and violent, one of the most talked about shows of its decade. Add a Scream sequel and a film called Companion, and by 2026, Jack Quaid is arguably a bigger star than either of his parents was at their peak. The boy they shielded from the headlines became the one thing that could put them back in the same room. For 25 years, Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid existed in public as exactly what that divorce made them. A cautionary tale people brought up whenever another celebrity marriage ended badly. They didn't appear together. They didn't co-sign each other's version of events. By every visible sign, that's simply where the story stayed. A split that never really closed. Then, this past April, their son did something neither parent's career and neither one's public statement had managed to do in a quarter century. On April 22nd, 2026, Jack Quaid married Claudia Dumit, his co-star from The Boys, in a wedding reported to be small and intimate. And in the coverage that followed, one detail did more work than any headline from the last 25 years. Meg Ryan was there, Dennis Quaid was there too. Reports described it as their first real public reunion since the divorce, the two of them in the same space, by most accounts on speaking terms, after what one outlet flatly called a 25-year nasty split, and credited the reunion to one person, their son. Nobody staged that for cameras. Nobody needed a headline to force it. Their son got married, and the two people who'd spent a quarter century being written about as enemies showed up for him in the same room at the same time. After everything printed about that marriage, the affair, the InStyle interview, the rebuttal, the years of silence, it turns out the thing that finally moved them into the same room was never a reporter's question. It was their son's wedding day. Step back from it, and this is really the whole shape of the story. She never held a press conference. She never went on a revenge tour through the talk shows. She said her piece exactly once, in 2008, to one interviewer, and then she spent the next 18 years being a mother instead of a defendant in the court of public opinion. Dennis Quaid, for his part, never withdrew his denial either. Both of them simply stopped fighting about it in public and let their son grow up. 25 years is a long time to let a headline stand uncorrected. It's also a long time to raise a child well enough that he becomes the reason his own parents finally stand in the same room again. Whatever anyone believes about who broke that marriage, nobody watching Jack Quaid's career today can seriously argue his parents failed him. There's one more detail worth sitting with before we let this story go, because it's the kind this audience doesn't forget once you hear it. They married on Valentine's Day. February 14th, 1991, the one day of the year built entirely around romantic love. Two people who'd met on a film set 4 years earlier and believed, that day, they were building something that would last. Instead, it became a 9-year marriage, a very public ending, an interview 8 years later that flipped the whole story, and 25 years of two people who couldn't be in the same room. And then, this spring, they were. Not as husband and wife, not as the couple who married on Valentine's Day, as two parents, standing near each other at their only son's wedding. 39 years after they first met on the set of a film, nobody remembers as the start of anything. None of this makes Dennis Quaid a proven villain. He denied her account in 2008 and has never walked that denial back. He also stood in that room in April at his son's wedding, same as she did. Maybe that's forgiveness. Maybe it's simply two people who decided their son mattered more than another 25 years of arguing about who remembers 2008 correctly. Either way, neither of them owed the rest of us that room. They gave it to us anyway, for one afternoon, because Jack Quaid asked them to be there. Meg Ryan never got a press conference to clear her name back in the year 2000. She got a paragraph in a magazine 8 years later, and then 25 years after that, a photograph from a wedding did the rest of the clearing for her, without a single new word from anyone. So tell us the verdict, because that part is yours to decide, not ours. Do you believe Meg Ryan that Dennis Quaid broke that marriage first? Or do you believe Dennis Quaid that she spent 25 years rewriting a simple story? Subscribe for the next one. If you want another wronged woman who kept a secret and let the truth stand on its own, our Maria Shriver video is right there on your screen. Meg Ryan waited 25 years for the truth to finally look like what she'd said it was all along.